3,000. Big. 31 target, north scoop stack, 36,000, 13,000. Bang. 40 scope, short skate, hot, right.
This is the Be One Change One podcast, where our mission is to help listeners define values, practice integrity, and inspire change.
Our vision is to mentor men and empower them to achieve more by taking responsibility for shaping their own lives.
He's CAS, an evolving man who has been shaped by adversity and continues to grow through his imperfections.
And he's Roscoe, an imperfect work in progress that tries to suck less every day.
Between us, we have over 40 years of Air Force fighter pilot experience with countless hours as trainers, instructors, and mentors.
Join us and learn to take responsibility for your own life as we dive into subjects from leadership to resilience to vulnerability.
Be the one who changes their course. Be decisive, driven, and purposeful. Set the example for others. Lead. We wish we'd had this show when we were younger men.
Be the one.
Well, I don't have a cool story, but I did want to read this.
Okay.
This is a review from Apple Podcasts on January 18th. And I don't know this person. You say you don't know this person.
I don't know.
It's a 5-star review. It says, the show we need, how Be One Change One, isn't the number one most played on the charts is beyond me. Roscoe and CAS are the guides we need to become better men for ourselves, our friends, and our families. If every young man listened to this show, the world would be a better place. Do yourself a favor and listen to every episode released. It's addicting, I promise. I've listened to most more than once. Then make sure you spread the word. Foot stomp, hint, hint. I'm looking forward to watching this show make it big. Watch out, Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Dude
was clearly drunk.
So I did want to read that, though, because, we talk a lot offline, and the things that people see or hear when we're behind the microphones are, I think that for the most part, they're well thought out. We actually put a lot of work into this.
Yeah, we try.
And we have a lot of dialogue, and we try to come up with original thought. We try to bring in studies or references or whatnots. But today we're going to talk about goals and maybe some planning at the end of it. And when we started this podcast, that was a big, long discussion, I remember, between you and I, like a several iterations of going through what are our goals for the podcast. And our big goal for the podcast was change at least one life, make impact on at least one person. And that's why I wanted to read that, because I think we met our goal.
Yeah, we did.
Maybe even more than that. Maybe it's a multitude of people out there. But I just wanted to give a shout out to the listeners. Thanks for supporting. Thanks for the 10 or 15 of you that are consistent listeners, and keep sharing and keep spreading the word, because we do really try hard at this to come up with topics that are pertinent and timely and impactful for people.
Yeah, and hopefully engaging as well, right? So, and it's also a great segue into goal planning too, because that was our initial goal, but that goal has shifted for us now too, right?
We're going to go back and revisit.
Yeah, we already have in some ways, right? We've gone back and revisited that and go, okay, well, where are we going to go to next? And do we need to make a pivot? Do we need to set our sights on something bigger or different? Or so that'll be a good discussion point for this episode.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, this is probably one that we probably should have put this out maybe a little bit sooner than we did. But on the other hand, the topics that we come up with, these aren't necessarily. It's not intended to be linear.
Yeah, it's not chronological.
At least not in my mind. It's not meant to be linear. However, some of these things you have to approach them in a linear way.
Yeah.
Like when we start talking about the planning and then the execution and eventually debriefing what you've done. Well, there is a step 1 to that, or maybe even a step 0, and that is you got to set a goal out there. You got to have a target,
have an objective.
Exactly. You got to have a target to hit before you can even start moving into the planning process. Step 1 of the planning process is identify the problem.
Yeah.
Right. So this is kind of what we're going to start out with today is, well, how do we do that? When we're trying to think up shit on our own, it's easy when your boss comes in and says, here's your problem, go solve it. That's a lot easier than you sitting in your lazy boy going, what can I do to help myself?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I completely agree. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, where the fuck do we start? There you go. You had one job.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you have the thing in there, do you?
Well, yeah. So see, I had a job and I completely failed at that. So let's remedy that real quick. Is this supposed to be blue?
No, it's supposed to be red.
Oh, geez. All right, time out.
It's a good thing Roscoe owns the editing machine. There we go. Okay.
All right. Nobody's watching this shit on YouTube anyway.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Whatever. All 10 of the people that are listening, I think we've seriously got, we've got like 5 reviews. I mean, they've all been good reviews, and I appreciate every one of them, but
there you go.
Come on, guys, share the show around. You don't realize how much sharing and leaving the reviews really helps spread the word. So if this is some shit that you like, man, share it with other people, share it with your family members, share it with your friends.
Yeah, please.
All right. So goal setting.
Yeah.
Where do we even start?
Well, I think you have to define the goal, right? What is the goal?
Okay.
What's the objective?
You want to do a little role play?
Sure.
Okay. This time I get to be the Viking and you get to be the Saxon lady.
Okay.
All right. So I brought my helmet. I'm going to get my Viking helmet on with the horns on my head. Seriously though.
Good.
So there was much rejoicing throughout the land. I have an idea.
Yeah.
I want to be a millionaire.
Okay.
Is that a good goal?
It may be.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it depends, but it's not very definable, right? If we go back to the SMART acronym.
Okay.
It's specific, I guess, to a certain extent.
Is it really?
I don't know. Is it? Probably not. So, I mean, honestly, I think the first thing that you have to do when you come up with a goal, you've talked about this on previous podcasts, like Simon Sinek has his 5 whys, right?
Yeah.
Well, what that really is it's kind of a motivational interrogation, if you will, to find out what's really driving
exactly.
Okay, so why do you want to be a millionaire?
Because I want to be able to buy and do the things that I want to do.
So why do you want to be able to buy and do the things that you want to do?
I don't know. So I can have, I want to be happy.
Okay, so what is happiness for you? How define happiness?
Maybe having the freedom to maneuver and free to do the things that I want to do.
Well, see, that's a great example, though, right? Because now we're starting to get down into the nitty-gritty, right? We're starting to get
Remember
down
the values exercise.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And it's not really about, I just want to be a millionaire. Maybe it is, hey, man, I just want to have the financial freedom to be able to do the things that I really want to do. You know, or I want to be in a position where I can have time, I can support my family and pay my bills and have leftover money, but then also be able to pursue other opportunities, right? It always goes a layer deeper, right? So that's where you really need to get to with the goal planning is, and that's what the SMART acronym, I think, helps you do, but also asking, kind of drilling down with that why, right? That's what we've talked about in other podcasts too. It's that kind of truer, and what's truest, right? We're trying to get to the truest. What's really the driving factor behind whatever this goal or objective is, because that's going to help you set the parameters, the short term, the medium term, the long term goals or benchmarks that you need to hit along the way to get there.
Yeah. And you know what? That was just a really quick, easy example. Mine went right back. You can see where I just went right back to my value set. My values were freedom, effort, and loyalty, and having that freedom of maneuver and freedom to do whatever the fuck I want to, really. And $1 million would definitely help that, right?
Sure.
But maybe you're saving money to buy a house because you want to raise your kids in a specific neighborhood, or you want them to go to certain schools, or you want to move to a different city, or maybe you're looking forward to retirement or something like that. And you know that $1 million is kind of that hitting that 7 figures is the dollar amount that you need to be able to live out your golden years the way that you want to. So whatever it is that's driving you, whatever your motivation is, I'd say we go back to the SMART construct, and let's break that down a little bit.
Well, definitely too, because timing's one of those things, right? And so if your goal is to be a millionaire, but you have a 40-year horizon, well, that's not necessarily a unrealistic goal.
For you and me, it's a little bit different, because
for you and I, it's a little different.
Slightly elder, not old.
We don't have as much time.
That's right. I mean, if you're a 20-year-old looking at this, your goals are going to be slightly different than if you're a 40-year-old. Because if you're a 40-year-old, your timeline is now cut in half. So you have to bring all that in. It is a holistic approach when you look at these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, I was reading this book a while back, and the name of the book is called Start, and he talks about going from average to awesome, and the whole book. You read these self-help books, and they're all kind of the same at some point, and you might read a whole book and underline one sentence in there. One of the sentences that I underlined in this book was when he was talking about going from average to awesome is you have to know where you are right now. So that goes into our self-inspection and
Yep.
all that, and being hyper aware to those things like, dude, you're 40 years old, you're not 20 anymore. So your compounding averages over the years aren't going to add up as much. And, maybe you have more disposable income in your 40s than you did in your 20s, but on a long scale, it's not going to add up to the same. And that just goes into, where your feet are planted right now. You have to know that. You have to be honest and you have to be aware of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also goes to, just to make a segue real quick, like self-help, there's all this self-help stuff out there. I mean, you could even maybe say that we're doing self-help stuff. I don't feel that way about it. I think it's a little more specific than that. But the problem with self-help is everybody looks at self-help as I've got to find what's wrong with me and try to fix it. And there isn't anything necessarily wrong with you, right? Like there's just things to improve on, right? We all have our lymphacs. We all have our issues. We all have things that we're trying to fix or maneuver around, or that may be hindrances to us. And that's what this is really about. So anyways, back to goal planning.
Did you ever hear George Carlin talk about self-help?
No.
You want to get into a fun argument on social media? I did this recently. I got into a kind of a fun discussion with a fellow about self-help. And I said, look, if you're buying a book on self-help, that's not self-help, that's help.
Yeah.
If it were self-help, you wouldn't need the damn book.
That's right.
George Carlin had a whole funny bit on it and everything.
That's funny.
It's a fun argument to get into people who are really fired up about this self-help crap.
Okay, so we've talked about this before, but go over SMART.
Okay.
The SMART acronym.
So again, this is one example. I think it's in the military construct, it's very easy for us. We learned this at an early age, and SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely, or time-based. Every one of your goals that you set should meet each of those requirements. And let's go through an example or two of maybe some goals that we've set that fit into those, and go back to the I want to be a millionaire, which is not really a goal. That's kind of an idea or a dream. And maybe we can turn that into a goal as kind of a practical exercise.
Go ahead.
So when I did a couple of, I guess it's been close to a year ago, Katie and I decided we were going to do 75 hard.
Okay.
And I'd already done one round. So the second round for me was going to be like, okay, I'm doing it for her, really. I kind of got out of the program what I needed to. I'm here to support her because I want to see her have that aha moment at the end of this, right? It's a mental toughness program, really, is what it is. And it gets you to the point where inside your brain, you can tell Stan to shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
All right. And get done what you need to get done. Nick Saban defined discipline as, there's this thing that you really want to do that you shouldn't. Can you make yourself not do it?
Yeah.
Or there's this thing that you really don't want to do that you should. Can you make yourself do it? That's really self-discipline in a nutshell. So going into 75 hard, I decided that, the construct of the program was what it is. And I decided to set a couple of side goals on it. The first time that I did it, I had covered, through either walking or jogging, I had covered a little over 850,000 steps during that. So I set a goal of, I'm going to hit 1 million on this one. In 75 days, I'm going to cover 1 million steps. I also was doing 100 push-ups a day, and I started with 30 burpees a day as kind of my side goals that I was going to hit. And at the end of it, I surpassed every one of those.
Nice.
Well, how did I do that, though? I fit everything into that SMART mantra. I was very specific with my goal. I said, I want to hit 1 million steps in 75 days. So I've done specifically, and I've done the time required for it. Is it measurable? Hell yeah, I can measure that. I can break it down to how many steps per day, which by the way, it's just over 13,000 steps per day that you need to hit. Is it attainable? It's a lot and it's hard, but yeah, I think I can do it. And realistically, can my body handle that? Do I have enough time to get this done?
Yeah.
And when I broke it down into that SMART mantra, I said, you know what? Yeah, I think I can do this. It's a little bit audacious and it's going to be rough at times, but I think I can do it. And I covered 1,090,000 and some change.
That's awesome. And I think what's important about what you just said too is don't be afraid to set audacious goals, right? So
stretch your limits. Yeah.
Don't be afraid. Now it's important to celebrate the small wins along the way, because that audacious goal may take a long time to get to, and there may be a lot of things that happen in between you getting there. But don't be afraid to set audacious goals.
Yeah, 100%. And you know what? There's another piece of that story is I got 30 days into this, and I'd been doing my 100 push-ups a day and my 30 burpees every day, and I learned a couple of good hard lessons on that one. Don't do burpees after dinner. That sucked. Don't do burpees with no underwear on. That also sucks.
Oh, yeah.
But so I get to the 30-day mark and I'm like, you know what? I mean, 30 burpees a day has gotten a little bit easy for me. I'm going to bump it to 45. So the last 45 days of the program, I did 45 burpees a day and 100 push-ups a day.
Nice.
And so I covered over 2,500 burpees during my 75 days. And so there's a good example of, hey, I'm doing pretty good on my goal. Maybe I stretch my legs a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe I open it up some and make it a little more, instead of 2X, let's go for 5X or something like that.
And I think that's important too, because when you do set goals, it's not finite, right? Like that's not the end all be all. There's going to be adjustments or pivots that you're going to have to make along the way, because things are going to happen. Sometimes it's positive, like what happened with you, where you're like, hey man, my body's responding to this. I could probably do more. Sometimes it's negative, maybe you have the same plan, but then you get really sick for 2 weeks and that knocks you off of that timeline to get 13,000 steps in a day and do all this shit, right? And so then maybe you have to make a slight adjustment to it.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid in this process to make pivots when you need to, and to readjust and reevaluate, because that's an important part of the process as well.
Yeah. And there's the and then to the SMART acronym and the setting the goals we'll get into towards the end, and probably a standalone episode on planning. But in order to meet that goal, there were certain things that I needed to do on the front end of that. So I bought me some new shoes. Yeah. So that I made sure that my feet were good and comfortable and I wasn't going to be wearing blisters on them. I mean, 13,000 steps it's a bit if you're not used to that, for sure. And doing that every single day for 75 days, man, I mean, I had a couple of days in there where they were 20,000 plus, and I had a couple of days in there where it was kind of a rest day where I only did like 4,000 or 5,000.
Yeah.
But to that point, I had a tracker that I
tracking
built.
it.
I had a tracker that I just built an Excel spreadsheet that did the math. I did the math on what my average needed to be, and then I had a cumulative average running of what I needed to hit. So I knew if I needed to push it up or pull it back here and there.
You knew where you were on your
Exactly.
timeline.
I knew where I stood. And just like a graph, you can graph this stuff out and I go, okay, well, I'm still on. If I need to take a rest day, I'm still good. I bought myself an Apple Watch so that I could track in real time how much ground I was covering, how many steps I was doing. So that's all going into, posturing your resources, posturing your timelines, getting the things together that you need so that you can meet that goal. And we'll get more into that when we get into the planning stuff.
Yeah.
But
and I think the important part too is you have to be specific about whatever that goal is going to be. So like, the previous example was, I want to be a millionaire. Okay, well, what does that really mean? Versus, okay, I want to achieve this specific target. I want to lose 10 pounds in 3 months. I want to save $3,000 in 6 months. Like, you can break that down and you can track your progress and you can see whether or not you're on task to do that. It's like a good buddy of mine, Bodie, sent me this that I thought was good. And he said, specific goals are important. Otherwise, it's like playing basketball without a hoop.
Yeah.
It's no longer basketball. It's just bouncing ball chaos and you don't achieve anything, right? But that's it, right? Like, it's just like, think of sports. I mean, we use sports analogies a lot on the podcast. If you're playing basketball with no hoop, what's the fucking point? We're not keeping track of statistics or who's got more points, or it's just, it's pointless, right? So you have to be specific about those goals.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? I think you bring up an interesting point there, although you probably didn't mean to. And it's when you're doing goals, when you're setting goals like this, when you get to the execution phase of the goal, like, here's my action plan, and now I'm going to implement, and I'm going to actually start going for this. There's going to be a winner and a loser. You're either going to meet it or you're not. And that's that measurable piece of it, right? So you put down this very specific goal of, I want to save $1 million in the next year, or whatever it is. At the end of the year, you're going to look back at your bank account, and it's either a yes or no. It's a black or white.
Well, and that goes back to achievable too, because if your plan is to save $1 million a year, but you're making $50,000 a year, that's probably not an achievable goal, right?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it depends. It's standard fighter pilot answer, right? It depends. Everything depends. But let's get to that in just a minute. I'm just looking at, regardless of what your goal is, the 10 pounds in 3 months, the 1,000,000 steps in 75 hard, saving for your next car payment, whatever your short-term or long-term goal is, when you get to the end of that timeline, whatever it is you set, it's black or white.
Yeah, you either did or
and it's not a, no, you either did or you didn't. Now, that's where you got a really good chance to debrief it, assess what went wrong. Maybe you won hard, and you go, man, I could have really pushed that up a little bit. I saved $2 million in a year instead of $1 million. Or if you only saved $100, maybe your goal was a little too audacious.
Yeah.
Maybe your plan wasn't effective or complete.
Or maybe you didn't execute it.
Maybe you didn't execute the plan. Maybe you went to the bar every Friday night instead of pocketing that money. So that's an opportunity to go into a debrief discussion. When we're just talking about the goals thing, that I want to be a millionaire, I personally don't think that's a goal. Now, if we were going to reframe that as a goal, a good place to start is what you just said, or what you asked me earlier was the 5 whys. Let's find out why, and maybe we move forward from there. Maybe you don't need $1 million for whatever your real intention is. If it's saving for a house, maybe you don't need $1 million. Maybe you just need 20 or 40,000.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point too, because when you actually take the time to get to what is the real why that's driving this, then that can reframe what those objectives need to be, or what those goals need to be. Because if the goal is, I just want to have the financial flexibility to do this, well, that may not require $1 million. That could just require a different job. That could just require a different position in the company you're in that makes a little bit more, right? So when you get down to the nitty gritty of it, you can really define those things, and then you can really set the goals that are going to allow you to achieve whatever that overarching objective is.
Well, instead of I want to say, or I want to be a millionaire, ask yourself those whys. And, you know, it turns out that maybe you want to take your wife on a trip to Europe for a couple of weeks. You don't necessarily need to be a millionaire to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe you just need to save 5 figures. So let's dial it back a little bit, and let's make this a little more kind of in our wheelhouse. I mean, unless you're a gazillionaire and saving $1 million a month isn't that big a deal to you, for most of us working class people, saving $1 million in a year is probably unrealistic.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm going to throw that out there. So specifically, let's say that we need to save $10,000 for our trip to Europe. All right. And I'm just totally making this shit up as we go. Well, when do we want to go on this trip? Next summer. So it's we're recording this in February. So let's say October.
Okay.
So that's call it 8 months. Can I save $10,000 in 8 months? Okay. Well, let's just write that down for now. So I want to save $10,000 for a trip to Europe. That's very specific, right? Now let's start to associate some timelines with it. Well, we want to go on this trip because we have a family trip coming up, and we want to go in October. That's 8 months. So I got 8 months to save $10,000. Now we get into kind of the middle part of that SMART acronym, where we're talking about the attainable and realistic stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what you can do there too, I mean, it goes in so many different ways, because maybe you don't budget well. You know, maybe you're not a real serious budgeter month to month.
Wait, you're telling me I have to back up to go forward?
Yeah. So maybe you need to, if you want to save that $10,000 in 8 months, you know how much you've got to save a month to get there. I was told there would be no math, but it's somewhere over $1,000 a month, right? So
I'm not even going to try.
Yeah, whatever, $1,500 a month. So let's say you got to save, $1,700 a month to get there to that $10,000 goal or whatever. Well, maybe you need to take a look at your budget and go, hey man, can I squeeze $1,700 a month out of the budget that we have for our family, and get realistic about that? Because when you go through and you actually start to parse out everything in the budget that needs to be paid, the money that's coming in and what's left over, that may not be attainable. That trip may need to get pushed to spring of the next year, right? So that you actually can have the ability to save that money. So,
well, go back to what I was saying earlier too. It's like, you have to know where you are. Yeah. So take a look at your bank account. Well, how much do you have saved right now? If you've got $6,000 in the bank, do you really need to save an additional 10? I mean, we can go into finances and talk about emergency funds and whatnot, but let's just work with round numbers real quick. But if you already have a certain amount set aside for, I don't know, whatever, just kind of sitting there doing nothing, maybe you can apply that to your end dollar amount and go, well, maybe I don't need to save 10. Maybe I only need to save 6.
Yeah.
Because I can take 4 of that 6,000 that I have sitting here. I've still got a little bit of an emergency fund. I'll take 4 of that, set it over here for vacation money. And now I've got to save 6 in 8 months. Suddenly that's a little more digestible, right?
Yep.
No math in public, but less than 1,000 per month.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
yeah. And then, I mean, the other thing too is, do you have the self-discipline to do it? So going back to what you said previously, maybe I only need to save $600 a month to do this trip with my friends. But if I'm blowing a couple $100 every Friday night at the bar, trying to have a good time, do I have the self-discipline to cut some of that out so that I can make sure that I reach that goal? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love my big O knot analogy, because we're reaching back into self-awareness. We're reaching back into financial discipline. We're reaching back into what your values are and why do you really want to go on this trip. Is it because you want to go see Europe? Is it because you really want to spend that 10 days with your family? You know, whatever's is it because you and your wife just need a second honeymoon because your relationship has been kind of on the fritz for a little bit? Whatever your motivator is, that goes back to your values. Yeah. Right. And the saving of the money month to month. What am I going to sacrifice every month to be able to save the money because this thing has a higher priority in my life based on my values? My wife and I, our relationship is that is at the top of the people and the things that I give a shit about, right? So I can set aside some Friday nights where I just Netflix and chill versus, that was really a bad analogy, where I can just sit around and watch Netflix and not do much, versus go out and hit the bars and drop a couple of Benjamins.
Right. Well, and I think what's important to understand too is that, you know, when we talk about goal planning, we talk a lot about specific things and planning, and it all seems like, okay, well, I can just develop this plan, and if I follow the plan, everything will work out magically.
Good luck with that.
Well, but what that doesn't recognize is, one, that shit happens, you know, so you may be saving for this $10,000 trip, and then the tranny goes out in the car and there's $5,000 that you've got to come up with all of a sudden. Yeah. You know, because you still got to get your ass to work.
Starting that show.
And so, right, there's things, but there's also, there's a whole mental aspect to this that I think most people may not recognize up front. And that's just the self-discipline and the self-control that some of these things take. And if you don't have a lot of that built, I think the first thing to understand is that they're skills. They're not inherent traits to people. Like, you can build self-discipline, you can build self-control as you work through these processes. But, you know, if you chronologically struggle with follow-through, then it's going to be really difficult for you to maintain any kind of rigid plan. Or some kind of an intense routine like you were talking about with 75 Hard without getting frustrated, because motivation is only going to take you so far.
That's right.
At some point, you have to be so intently focused on what you're trying to do that you have the discipline to say no when you have to say no.
Yep. I've said for a long time, and you guys can write this shit down, motivation will get you off the couch today. Discipline will get you off the couch tomorrow.
That's right.
Right. And it's a completely different mindset. I can get motivated to do just about anything, and you can hold your breath long enough to get through these short periods in these short iterations. But if you're training for a marathon, right, that's going to take a tremendous amount of discipline. Like, I don't think motivation is going to get you to that level of training, because that's going to be a 6-month long process. That's going to be, unless you're already in marathon shape, but if you're like me, that would be a very long process to train up to that and get to where I could run 20 miles without stopping. I mean, holy crap. I don't even know if my body that may not be realistic for me in the shape that my body's in with my joints and my ailments. I may have to dial that back and go, hey man, let's start with a 5K and kind of bump it out from there.
Yeah. Because if you're in that habit of that stop-start cycle, like if you're one of those people who, you know, gets all excited to start something, and then as soon as you hit the first roadblock, everything, all the wheels fall off the bus, that can be really demoralizing, right? Like, and that will take that motivation piece away from you. And so willpower and motivation aren't going to be enough. At some point, you've got to add discipline to the mix, or it's going to be really hard. The other thing too, like the thing that I probably struggle the most with when it comes to like setting goals and achieving them, is perfectionism. I'm a perfectionist,
that's
right?
Tough, man.
And it's like, do the all or nothing. I mean, that's you in a fucking nutshell, Roscoe. How did I get in this nutshell?
It's a big nutshell. How did I get in here?
But that perfectionism or perfectionist mindset isn't going to allow you the flexibility sometimes to make mistakes or have failures, and it's just going to lead to frustration and doubt around achieving that set goal. So you've got to be a little more fluid in it, right? And you've got to go, okay, I had a setback, but now that the setback has happened, how do I readjust my priorities, or do I need to readjust my timeline? Like I said, if it's $10,000 and I've got 6 saved and everything's looking great, and now I've got to drop 5 on a transmission, that's going to put me back, man. So does that timeline need to shift, or is there some other things that I can do on the budget to squeeze a little bit more out to still meet the original goal? You have to maintain a little bit of fluidity. You can't be super rigid in these things, I guess is what I'm getting to.
Well, speaking of rigidity, I'm going to go ahead and call a smart audible right now on this show, because we're talking so much into the planning process, and what you were just talking about was, man, we can contingency plan a lot of this stuff, and you can think ahead to a lot of that kind of stuff, and you can have in your hip pocket already maybe a potential solution to some of that. So if you are realistic in your planning process and you understand that, man, I'm going to take setbacks, or like in my 75 hard example, man, what if I twist my ankle? Okay, well, I've got the spreadsheet there, and maybe I can just cover 3,000 or 4,000 steps for a week, and then I'll have to hit it really hard after that. I'll give my ankle time to heal up by dialing it back, but then I should be able to hit it hard, and I can bump that from 13,333 out to maybe 16,000 a day average for a couple of weeks and get me back on track, and the example that you were talking about the monetary thing, you had 6, you got to spend 5 on a transmission. Well, now you're down to 1. If you have a contingency plan already over here that says, hey man, if this happens, if something like that happens, well, I'm either going to have to bump out my trip a little bit, punt it down the road a couple of months to give myself time to recuperate that, or pick up an extra shift here or there, or cancel YouTube TV for a couple of months. There are ways to maneuver this around if you have the forethought in the planning process.
Yeah, I agree with that. And take advantage of the upswings too, right? Because I'll use both examples. Go back to your 75 hard. You got to do 13,000 steps a day. Well, let's say one day you're just in the gym and you're feeling good, man, and you can do way more than 13,000 steps that day. Do you? Or do you go, well, I only need 13,000 steps a day, so I'm just going to stop at 13. No, dude.
I pushed.
Yeah, right?
Yep.
Get ahead of it. Going back to the budgeting example, you need $10,000, and you figured out that you can save $1,200 a month in your budget. Well, let's say bills come in under whatever you had planned for, and you've got a surplus of a couple $100. You going to go out to eat?
No.
Or are you going to throw that $300 on top of it?
I'm going to get ahead of the game.
$300 ahead, right?
That's right.
So there's all these different ways that we can manipulate that.
I'm going to save for that rainy day.
Exactly, to set ourselves up for those contingencies that may come down the road.
And that example that you gave, literally saving for a rainy day, because inevitably in that 75 days, there's going to be a day in there where I can't go outside and get 20,000 steps.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to go inside and maybe get 3,000 or 4,000 or something.
Well, and that's the point, right? Is at some point you have to recognize that in these processes, you have to accept that there are going to be times where you are making gradual, maybe not as much as you want, but you're making gradual steps toward achieving whatever that is. And that it's not going to be a perfect process. It's going to be an imperfect process. We're imperfect people. Shit happens. We fuck things up all the time, and you have to give yourself a little bit of flexibility for the mistakes or the failures that are going to happen. Otherwise, you're just going to get frustrated.
Yeah.
You're just going to start to doubt the fact that you can even do it. And then that's just going to spiral out of control. And then you're going to be that person that is back into that stop-start cycle.
Yeah.
Start it, do good for a couple of weeks, hit a roadblock or obstacle, stop.
Yeah.
So.
Well, in my example too, it's only 75 days, man. That's 2.5 months. We're talking about a really short term thing here in the grand scheme of life. 2.5 months is like a drop in the bucket, right?
Yeah.
And you can just about hold your breath that long. So as painful as it was, I was able to push through a lot of that shit just because I could just about see the horizon. Now there's some mind tricks that you kind of have to play with yourself on something that's that finite. And I had very clear left and right boundaries on what I was supposed to do. And I say, I've done this program 4 times, and I say, you don't have to win 75. You don't have to win the whole thing. You win one day 75 times. When you go to bed at night, Katie and I literally have a whiteboard where we just put check marks on there. Did we win? Yes or no? And then you erase it and you start over the next day.
Yeah.
And it's really that simple, man.
Yeah.
And so it's day to day. And that's your Nerox focus, is the day to day stuff. But Cass, what if I'm a 20-year-old kid and I'm in my freshman year of college and I've still got 4 years to go, man? How do I do that? That's like 4 fucking years.
4 years to go to like the overarching goal is to get the bachelor's degree or
Well, 4 years ago, I was just getting my driver's license.
Yeah.
Like, think about this for a 20-year-old's timeline on his time horizon of his life. That's a quarter of his, or 20% of his life. That's a big chunk.
Yeah, it is.
4 years ago, I was just learning how to drive. And now you're expecting me to wait another 4 years to get this piece of paper that says I'm smart. How do I maintain that focus for that long?
Yeah, well, that's where I think you have to break it down into sizable chunks, right?
Yes.
So
Chunking.
Yeah,
Love it.
you do. You have to go, okay, well, I'm not yes, here's the long-term objective, but here's all the intermediate steps to get there.
Yep.
And so what do I need to focus on right now? Well, what 4 classes do I have this semester?
Yep.
Okay, I have, class 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, what's my goal in each of those classes? What's the GPA that I want to hold? How do I want to perform in those classes? What's the net effect that I want to get at the end of those classes, right? And that's what we focus on. And then day to day, it's okay, what do I need to do today to get the net effect in class 1 or class 2, whatever class it may be that you're dealing with for that day, right? And that's what we do day to day. And then, week to week, prepping for midterms, prepping for finals. It's focusing on those small achievable steps that get me to that overarching goal. That's how you stay motivated. That's how you stay engaged. And that's also where you find the small victories.
That's right. And I had this exact discussion with the kids when they went to college, and it was, dude, you can't focus on the finish line, man. It's too far away. It's on mile 1 of the marathon. You don't focus on the finish line. You focus on the next mile marker.
Yeah.
And that's it. And I don't know if you know who Chad Wright is, but he runs this, he's a former Navy SEAL guy, and he's a great motivational speaker. And he tries to take a lot of the mindsets that we learned in these elite level teams and transfer them over to everyday people. And one of the stories that he tells was they were in Bud's training, and his objective every day, his first objective on every single day was make it to breakfast. If I can just make it to breakfast, then I can get through breakfast, and then I can make it to the next evolution or whatever it was. Yeah. And so they were doing this one evolution, and it was, you have to run a mile until we tell you to stop. So on the beach, they would run down and back, and that's 1 mile. And then they tell them to do it again. And he said, you might run 20 miles that day, but when I was in it, when I was looking at it, I was like, well, shit, I can run a mile. Yeah. So you run a mile. And they said, do it again. Okay, well, I can run a mile. And you run a mile. Do it again. Well, shit, I can run a mile. And so that's kind of the way you break this down, right? And you're in a 5-year college. You get this 5-year horizon out in front of you to get that diploma. You can't look 5 years in the future. You look at, what's my assignment this week? If I do good on my assignment this week, then that'll help me prepare for my midterms. That's right. My midterm grade plus my final grade gets me a good grade in the class. If I get good grades in all my classes, now I've got the 4.0 GPA that gets me on the honor roll, that gets me the great job. Yeah. See, so that's how you break that down into right here, what's right in front of me that I can affect right now versus focusing on the long term.
Yeah, it's just like, going back to the fighter squadron, when you're a young punk, or even if you're going through upgrades, when you're in the BFM phase of your FLUG or your IPUG, you're not thinking about ACM and ACT and BSA or surface attack or SEED or any of that stuff. Yeah. You're thinking about BFM. You're thinking, and you're not thinking about defense or high aspect when you're doing offensive BFM. You're thinking about, how do I teach this? How do I draw this? How do I execute this? What are the things that I'm going to see? What are the potential contingencies I've got to plan for? That's all you focus on. You focus on the near rocks first, not the far rocks.
How many times do you see this? All right, so you got a young fluggy, and he's leading BFM for the first time. And so you're in line abreast, and you're getting ready for your 9K or your 6K, and he goes, all right, CAS flight, check 45 right, and he turns left. Yeah. Have you seen that? Oh, yeah. That's a guy that needs focus.
We had a guy, we had one of the students in the B course one time. His call sign was Zoolander.
Oh, it couldn't turn left?
Because he was an ambi-turner. Because in high aspect BFM, there was like 2 or 3 sets where, or offense or defense, I don't remember what, but a couple of times where they were like, check 45 right, and he went left or whatever. So Zoolander.
It happens. I knew this chick in flight school that she had a big L, and she took in Sharpie and she wrote a big L on this hand, a big R on that hand.
We did that to students' gloves when they would have issues with left and right.
It's like Forrest Gump. Lieutenant Dan's up there yelling at Forrest Gump to turn left, Gump, and he's turning to the right.
Or ACM, right? You got the adversary behind you, and you give them the break left call, and they go right. And next thing you know, you're in the fat lady's ass.
Fat lady's ass.
Both pointed at the adversary, and that never goes well. So unless you know how to fly,
it's an interesting tactical problem to solve. All right, so back to the SMART acronym. We've gave a couple of examples of very specific things and measurable things. Let's talk a little bit about the meat of it there, that attainable and realistic piece of it.
Yeah, so it has to be attainable, right? So you can't say
$1 million in a year.
Well, right, yeah. Again, if you want to make $1 million in a year and you're in a job that makes $50,000 a year, probably not attainable,
right?
Or realistic for that matter,
valid,
right?
Yep.
So they have to be things that are actually achievable for you to do, right? So if you don't work out and then your desire is to run a marathon in 3 months, that's probably not going to happen.
That's going to be tough.
A 5K,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
Right? You could get ready for a 5K, you know, and you could even set some parameters around that. I want to run a 5K in less than 30 minutes or something like that, right? That's
very
over
specific.
an 8-minute mile. That's not it's almost a 10-minute mile, honestly, for a 5K, right? Because what is it, 3.08 miles?
Yeah, something like that.
So, right. So there's ways that we can set goals that are very achievable, but that also match, like you were talking about before, where am I at right now? Like, you know, you may want to, if maybe you make $250,000 a year and you want to save.
That's suddenly a little bit more attainable now.
And let's say you make $250,000 a year and you want to save $30,000. Well, if you've got $80,000 of debt between cars and credit cards or something like that, then that $30,000 may become way more difficult to attain than if you're making $250,000 a year and the only debt you have is your mortgage.
Go back and ask yourself the whys.
Well, but then, and that could also adjust your goal too. Maybe my goal isn't to save $30,000. Maybe my goal is to pay off $30,000 of debt, right? So you have to take all those things into account. And that's part of to me, that's the achievable and realistic. Is it achievable? Is it something that I really know I can do? That's not to say it doesn't need to be audacious. Like you were saying, make it a bunch of steps.
Yeah.
Maybe make it a little more difficult than it could be. Don't make it as easy as possible.
Yeah.
You know, but is it actually realistic? Is it something that, based on all of these other factors, something that I can actually do in the time frame that I'm allotting myself to accomplish it in?
No, you do. Katie, one of the fitness challenges that we did, Katie lost 23 pounds in just a very short amount of time, just a couple of months. If we were to do that again, is it realistic that she's going to lose 23 pounds? No, because Katie's kind of a small little petite thing, right? So I think when you frame these as realistic, honestly, man, and we sound like a fucking broken record sometimes, but
we do.
You got to know where you are. You got to do this self-inspection stuff to know. You got to know yourself, and you got to know what is realistic. What can I actually accomplish? Is it realistic that I can walk 1 million steps in 75 days? Yeah, that's realistic because I'm an active dude. I mean, I walk, I take the stairs. I mean, I walk all over the place. So that's not an unrealistic goal to me. But for somebody who sits on the couch all day and doesn't do things, and their bones and their joints and their muscles aren't in shape like mine are and conditioned to that kind of stuff, that's significantly more of a challenge for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is very individual, and it's very intimate to an individual, and you have to know where you are so that you know where you're starting. And if you know the start line, then you can develop the finish line.
Well, and this goes back to self-inspection, right? Which the first piece of it is you've got to be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
Right? You have to be honest with yourself, and you have to take some stock in where you're at and what's really achievable.
Yeah.
You know, and then make some good plans around that. Because and a good point to what you said too, as you start to do this, you know, maybe you achieve the one goal, and so, you know, maybe you have a fitness goal that you want to do the 5K. Okay. Well, at the end of that, you achieve it. Great. What's the next goal? Well, if the next goal is I'm going to run another 5K in 2 months, but now I'm going to run it in 21 minutes or less.
That's going to be a challenge,
stretch, right?
Yeah.
That's a stretch, right? It's going to be really hard to go from a 10-minute base to a 7-minute base, you know, in a month or two, right?
Yeah.
And so it has to be achievable.
Depends on where you are.
It does.
I mean, if you set the goal of run the 5K in 10 minutes, 10 minutes per mile, but you actually ran it in 8.5.
Yeah, then you might not get that far off from a 7.
So when you complete that first goal, then you take a reassessment, you know, do some more of that self-inspection shit and go, okay, well, I did 8 or 8.5. Can I realistically get this down to 7.5?
Yeah.
Maybe you can over a couple of months if you're, it depends on what your training program looks like.
And it depends. It does. Because you're going to also hit, well, that's fitness. You hit plateaus too, or age, right? I'm getting older. I can't do the same shit I used to do in the gym, right? So my PR for a mile is 5 minutes and 56 seconds. If I want to beat that, I'm trying to beat it by like 2 seconds. I'm not trying to beat it by 30
Well,
because
that's
I
also
can't
like
run that fast anymore.
That's a mathematical thing too. Like, and I don't know exactly what the mathematical law is, but as the sample gets smaller, the fractions, and
Get tighter.
I don't even know what I'm trying to say here.
Just
but
like my hips.
If you're trying to go from a 10 to a 9, that's not as big of a jump as going from 555 to 550.
Yeah.
Like you're going to be able to shave a minute off at the higher end because the funnel is just bigger up there.
Right. And the point is it just has to be achievable and realistic in that sense.
Yeah.
So you have to be honest with yourself. In that.
Well, I got this funny story back. I want to tell a story on Tyler when he was a little kid. He was, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 years old. And he had his friend Dallas come over and stay for a weekend at our house. And Dallas had been taking karate for a couple of years, right? And they're little kids. Well, they're playing and whatnot. And Tyler's kind of always had this attitude of, I can do that. I can do that. And I think one of the stories was he goes, I can snowboard. And you put him on a snowboard and he fucking crash and burn.
Yeah.
Right? Because he didn't know how to snowboard. So anyway, so him and Dallas come downstairs and they come into the living room and they're getting ready to go out in the front yard. And we're like, what are you guys going to do? What are you going out to play or whatever? And he goes, we're going in the front yard to do karate. I was like, Tyler, you don't know karate. He goes, I can karate. And so they go out in the front yard. Katie and I are watching through the windows, right, through the blinds. And they're out there and they're kind of dancing around. And Tyler's doing his little dancing around. And Dallas is just kind of standing there with his fist in front of him, just kind of watching him like this. And
looking for the opening. Tyler
like makes a move and Dallas goes boom and hit Tyler right in the face and dropped him like a sack of shit. And he's crying and stuff. And Dallas is just like, and Katie and I are like rolling off the couch laughing. They're like, told you didn't know karate. So there it is, man. You got to know yourself, know where you're starting from. If you don't know karate, don't go do karate with somebody who's been doing karate for a really long time. Yeah. Go to a couple of classes, start small.
That's it.
If you're trying to train for a marathon, Brittany runs a marathon, right?
Yep.
If you're wanting to run a marathon, if that's one of your goals, first of all, set a realistic timeline and know that 26.2 miles is a really long fucking ways.
Yeah.
Right. And it's going to take a tremendous toll on you. And if you're completely sedentary in your active lifestyle or inactive lifestyle, it's going to take you a long time to get there.
Yeah.
She didn't hardly make it down the block. And I mean, I think we can all attest to things that we've done where we started out and we're like, yes, we're gung ho. And then you get in and you start doing it and you're like, shit, this sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's true for anything, right? I mean, and again, that's why like maybe you set the 5K first. And then if the 5K goes well, then maybe you set an 8-mile mark. And then after that, maybe you do a half marathon, and you do it in incremental steps. Yeah. So.
Well, I had this idea last January. I'd kept seeing this Facebook ad come up occasionally, and it was this Xterra race over here in the White Tanks. And it was a half marathon trail race, single track trail through the mountains. And man, I haven't run more than 5 miles in like 5 years. So I'm like, I wonder if I could do that. Right. Well, I'm an active guy, maybe not at that distance, but I'm pretty active. Yeah. I'm in decent shape. I have a really strong mentality. I mean, I have a lot of self-discipline. I have a lot of mental toughness to where if I put my mind to it, man, I can power through this. Right? It's a couple of hours. I can push through this. Right. So I kind of signed up for it just as a what if, I wonder if my brain, if my mind is strong enough to push through that and get to the finish line. And I set a goal out there of 2 hours and 30 minutes. I get to the halfway point water station. I took some water and I felt pretty good. And it was all uphill to that point. I'm still feeling pretty good. I'm running with an old man who's like 65 years old. And I say old. He's 65 years old, and he and I are cruising. We're talking. We're having a great time. And then we hit the back stretch, and it's all downhill. And within about a mile and a half, my quads are just shot. Yeah. Those muscles right on top of your knees that take all that. In fact, dude, I was wrecked. So then I readjusted my goal. Instead of 2:30, and I'm watching. I'm keeping track on my watch, doing the math in my head, and I'm like, 2:30's probably not realistic at this point, right? And that's a little soul crushing. But you know what? Here's another goal. I'm going to make a smart audible to that goal. I realize that I probably not going to make this, but I'm going to adjust my goal mid-course, and I'm going to say I'm going to finish without stopping, and I met that goal. So I was able to run the back half of the course, the back 6 miles, without stopping, and I finished in 2:38. So, I mean, when I looked back on it, this wasn't a colossal failure for me at all. It wasn't, I didn't look at it as like, oh, I didn't make my time. I looked at it and I took the dub, man. I was like, dude, I just ran 13.1 miles without stopping, and I almost met my time despite being out of shape.
Well, and that's the other thing too is, and that goes back to that perfectionism mindset we were talking about. Like if you're really rigid about this stuff, then you can drive yourself crazy with it, because you go out there and you do that and you run the 13.1 or whatever it was, and you do it 8 minutes over what your intention was. Well, you have two options there. You can go, oh, I suck and I should have trained harder and blah, 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 blah. Or you can go, dude, that was pretty, I didn't meet my goal, but that was pretty close. And I did a pretty good job. And so when you're doing these things, like take into account, you may not reach that goal in the timeline that you set. Let's go back to the $10,000 thing. Maybe you were only able to save $9,000. Well, did you fail? No, dude, you saved $9,000 fucking dollars, right?
Exactly.
You can probably figure out a way to scrape together the other 1,000, or let the other 1,000 cover whatever the overage is going to be in the next month, and then you're still kind of there, right? But so you take the wins is what I'm trying to say, right? You have to take the wins when they come, in order to maintain the motivation and the discipline to keep pushing forward. Yeah. Because if you're so rigid in your thinking around, well, I didn't meet it specifically, well, okay, well, that could have gone back to you didn't set something that was completely realistic or attainable, or there could have been something that happened in the course of getting to that goal that took you off track, that was outside of your control. Like shit happens, So, but it's like you were saying on a previous podcast, man. If you set a 10x goal and you hit 3x is pretty fucking good.
That's good,
right?
Yeah.
You're still better. Yeah. You're still further down that road than you were when you started this. Yeah. So learn the lessons, make the adjustments, pivot, reset, set a new goal, step out. That's the process.
Well, and that's a great point of either meeting the goal or coming very, very close to a goal. Let's take a look at it from, it's a colossal failure at some point. Let's say I got to like the 4 mile mark and I couldn't walk anymore, and I had to call the medics up there. Maybe I bit off more than I could chew. Maybe I had an injury. Maybe it just wasn't my day. Maybe I didn't hydrate properly and I bonked really hard, or whatever it was. But now I have to go back to formula and I have to really look at it. So rather than looking at, I didn't meet the goal that I set, rather than looking at that as a failure and I suck and using this as an indictment of my self-worth, let's look at it as a learning opportunity. What can I get out of this? Okay, so I bonked at the 4 mile mark. What can I do better next time? Well, I'm going to eat some oatmeal and a power bar before I go. I'm going to drink a half gallon of water before I set out on the run. Or maybe I tape my ankles so that I don't twist it on the rocks, or, whatever the thing is. And it really doesn't matter what your goal is that you set out there. You're probably going to lose one eventually. If you set enough goals out there, you're going to take an L at some point. And if you do some reflection on that, you can start to dissect it, and you can start to find these little friction points that went on either through the planning process, maybe even the goal setting process, the planning process or the execution process. And that's where the learning happens. Yes. And that's how you apply that to the next iteration. Absolutely. So the next half marathon that I run, I'm going to tape my ankles up a little more. Maybe I'm going to take some of those little goo packets that are the carbohydrate gels or something like that, so I can still take away from this loss. I can still gain some good lessons learned so that I can win the next time. Yeah.
Well, and so here's a perfect example too, and this kind of segues nicely into timely. So I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I went to Embry-Riddle. I was in Air Force ROTC. I'm on the timeline that I have in my mind to get there. I come home from my first year of school. My mom has multiple sclerosis. Her and my dad are going through a divorce. It's a fucking shit show. I stay home. I get a job. I help my mom pay bills. That timeline, gone, right? Completely exploded, right? So I started doing other things, focus on other things, set different goals, because I think I'm outside of whatever it was that I was going to be able to achieve. Yeah. And then I'm 23 years old. I'm doing one class a quarter or a semester at UW towards my bachelor's. I'm not even like halfway there. I'm 23. And I've got this nagging in the back of my mind with I can live with no, but I can't live with what if, right? So I'm like, fuck it. I'll go talk to a recruiter. So I go talk to a recruiter. Well, 27 is the age. You have to be in the Air Force through OTS with a pilot slot before you turn 27. Okay. So I go back and I sit down and I look at things and I go, okay, realistically, what's the earliest that I can get done with school?
Yeah.
Well, the timeline that I'm on is about 27.
Yeah, you got a lot to pack in there.
Yeah. Do I want to play with that? Do I want to play with bumping it right? Because going back to contingency planning, what happens if something happens where I can't take a class one semester? Yeah. So what do I do? How am I going to do this? Right. So I start breaking it. So you start breaking it down and you start going, okay, well, here's some couple options. What are some other things I can do? Well, how can I get back to school full time? Well, the only way to have the flexibility to go back to school full time is to start my own business. Well, that's fucking scary.
Yeah.
Because what if I can't get enough people to hire me to do things to pay my bills? Question mark, right?
Yeah.
So, but you come up with a game plan and you go, well, we'll give it a shot, right? So I leave the legislature, I start my own business, I'm doing political consulting, I go back to school full time. I'm 25 when I go back to the recruiter with my bachelor's degree and go, I'm ready. Or 24. And, put my package in, end up getting picked up. So I'm in the Air Force at 25. Okay, great. But that's the process, right? So you have to, and I'm kind of leading into planning a little bit and talking through this too, but you have to break these things down, right? Because it's those timelines have to mean something, but you also have to be realistic in how fast you can achieve them. And if it's not something that's achievable, then you have to ask yourself, well, what has to change for me to achieve it in that timeline, right? You have to break all those pieces down.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, dude. And a lot of that you were talking about is there's going to be a lot of things that are just not in your control.
Yeah.
Like you can't really control what classes are offered every semester. You can map it out to a certain point, but maybe there's a prerequisite and it's only offered once a year.
Dude, I took a ton of classes that I had no interest in because they were the classes that were available when I could go to school.
Yeah, I did the same thing, man. And we were kind of laughing. We were laughing beforehand. We were talking about getting our degrees and whatnots. And my experience was very different, I think, than yours. Maybe a little bit the same in some respects, but I was going to night school. So 4 or 5 days during the week and maybe twice on Saturday, I was meeting for classes and working full time at the same time. But I didn't really have a lot of control over like my work schedule. I had to beg, steal, and borrow to get put on mid shift, working from 11 at night to 7 in the morning so that I could go to school in the evenings. Yeah. So I made sure that time was blocked off. But man, that was an uphill battle talking to a lot of different people and cashing in a lot of favors to make sure. Oh, I had to, in order to get put on mid shift, this was the deal that one of the guys talked to me on the side. He goes, man, if you get promoted, then we can put you on mid shift as the expediter. So now I got this extra monkey on my back going, well, okay, if I can do this, then I can get that. So I studied my ass off and made tech sergeant. And now I go and dangle that in front of his face and say, hey, you said, and he goes, okay, cool. and he left me on mids, but that was a lot of maneuvering and trying to control the things that I can control. There's also going to be a lot of things that you just can't, you don't have any say over.
That's right.
This class is only offered in the springtime on odd years. Well, shit, man. I mean, that really fucks my timeline up. Is there a suitable sub that I can take? I mean, can I take it online? Can I clip it? There's a way you can move around it. Maybe there's not.
That's important too, though, is that make sure you ask those questions because sometimes there's usually a fix, but if you don't ask the questions, you're not going to find it. So, but then there's also all those iterative pieces in between that too, right? So it wasn't just, okay, so what do I do around work? And then how do I set up my school schedule so that I can still do work and school full time? But then it's, okay, well, I've also got to think about the AFOQT, the Air Force Officer Qualification Test, and how do I get ready for that?
Yeah.
Because I have to score well on that if I want to get a pilot slot.
That's right.
And so what do I do for that? Well, you go find the fucking book that's this thick.
Yeah. Back in those days, it was an actual book. It wasn't online.
And you start studying it, and you start going through it just like you did for the SATs or the ACTs or the GRE or whatever you've taken. And you start going through and going, okay, and start getting familiar with how they ask questions and how to play the game on the multiple choice questions and eliminate the ones that aren't the right ones so that you're guessing at 50% instead of 25%.
That's right.
I mean,
Well, you were getting to something there too that was kind of unseen a little bit, but it was, so you met the first goal, and you kind of have to ask yourself, now what?
Mm-hmm.
And you go to the second goal, and then you go, well, now what? So in the original example, I want to be a millionaire. Well, we've clearly showed that was not a proper goal. I think a more realistic goal was, let's define exactly why you need that money.
Yeah, what's that about?
Maybe it's only $50,000 because you want to buy a house, and then you set a timeline for it. You make it very specific, et cetera. Well, what happens when you save that 50? And now what? It's like, it's kind of that example of, I want to be successful or whatever. Well, what happens when you reach your version of success? Are you going to stop?
Yeah.
Are you just like, okay, well, I guess I'm done. Yeah. Let's celebrate. Where's the confetti? No. You set another goal and you keep going, right? And this is that continuous self-improvement that we talk about, that get 1% better, always having something to strive for, a carrot to chase, something to do. Because if you're not in pursuit of something, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, are you just sitting stagnant in your life? Are you just watching the paint dry?
Well, that's a great point, Roscoe, because the one purpose of setting goals is to keep you striving towards something, individually, collectively, whatever the case may be. But going back to what you were saying, drilling down and figuring out why is that goal really important to you, that's where you're going to find the motivation to carry through.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you don't really understand why it's important to you, then when you do start to hit those roadblocks or those issues or those uncontrollable circumstances, you're going to throw your hands up and go, "Oh, fuck this!" Because you haven't defined why it's that important to you, right? And that's why those things are so important to do in the process, because that's what's going to help carry motivation and that desire and that drive to continue forward, even in the face of that adversity.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, man. And I think this ties in together with a lot of the things that we've talked about in the show already, going all the way back to the self-inspection, values, integrity, those episodes, and how those things are going to help you set these goals and help you keep driving forward. So step by step, there's a process to winning, right? And this is what I told people in the past that I've coached up is, winning is simple. Like, there's a simple process to winning, and it doesn't matter what you're trying to win. If you're trying to win a football game or if you're trying to win the goal of save $1 million, the process is pretty simple. You got to plan it out, and then you got to get your resources in order, and then you got to execute at a high level, right? And I use the 3 Ps as a construct. Something I came up with, 3 Ps is plan, posture, perform. Right. So I'm going to plan this out, and I'm going to try to think of every nuance that I can of this problem that I'm trying to solve.
Yeah.
And then in the posture phase, I'm gathering my resources. I'm getting the people and the things in place that I need so that when I get there, I can just reach over and grab it. I don't have to go hunting for it. My 75 hard example, I bought brand new shoes. I got me an Apple Watch. I created my tracker, et cetera, et cetera. I made sure that I had enough hydration around me for all these long days of walking and whatnot. And then you have to just execute at a high level. So the thing that comes before that plan, posture, perform, that's the goal setting. Yeah. Number one, the very first step in any planning process that you look at, and there are hundreds of them out there. You can go and research the PMP process, the military decision-making process, whatever it is.
It's all the fucking same.
It's all the same shit. Identify the problem.
Yeah.
Right? Identify the problem is the number one step in all of these processes. Well, identifying the problem, you're going to do that in your goal setting. That you're creating this, right?
Yes.
It's very different if your boss comes in and says, here, go solve this.
Yeah.
Well, that's your tactical problem that you have to solve.
Yeah.
But if you're creating this shit from scratch out of your own mind, that's the goal setting process. You are creating the problem that you're then going to solve in the planning process.
That's right. Yeah. And if I had to kind of give a big picture overview, like SMART acronym is important, right? Because that's going to help you define that goal very specifically.
That's right.
And with all those left-right boundaries that are going to make it attainable and achievable. But before that, you got to do the 5 whys, right? You really have to drill down and go, what is it about this goal that's so important for me? Apply the SMART acronym to it, and then break it down into sizable chunks so that you can celebrate the small victories that you get along the way. That will help keep you motivated.
That's right.
On the way to achieving it.
Well, I mean, we did this all the time in the squadron as well. So tactical problem today is we got to defend CAS's mom's house for the vol, the 25-minute vol that we've got. Well, dude, that's a pretty clearly defined goal that we have to do. We have to defend CAS's mom's house, and we have this amount of time that we have to be on station. We have to do it. If we run out of gas or missiles, then we fail the mission.
Yep.
Right. So now the planning process, everything that we do from there on, after we identified that problem, everything that we do supports solving that problem.
That's right.
So,
yep. All the planning, the tactical execution,
That's it.
how we're going to set up caps, what our shot doctrine is going to be, what our flow decisions are going to be,
all that stuff,
all our contingency planning, all of that.
Yeah. Well, when we get into the planning episode, and we'll just kind of wet the whistle real quick, because the goal setting process, you're creating the problem.
Yep.
And that's a really, I don't know, it sounds like a negative, but it's really a positive thing.
Yeah,
like you're creating this problem for yourself that you then have to solve. And this problem could be a good thing,
Yep.
right? Saving $1 million is a good thing, right? So I created a problem for myself. And now when I go into the planning process, there's levels to the planning. There's strategic, operational, tactical, and contingency planning that you have to get through. And I use the example of my football season. The strategic level would be the season. I'm going to look at the season as a whole. When do I start practice all the way out to the championship game? Because, I'm planning on a fucking trophy.
Yeah.
Right. And I have to figure out all these little things. When is spring break in the middle of this? When does little Johnny go? My star running back is going on family vacation. What are the down days? I got to order all the pink shit for October breast cancer awareness. All these things go into that strategic level planning that I have to have set aside maybe 6 months ahead of time. Then the operational planning is I've got a finite amount of time between my very first practice and my very first game. Well, that's a good opportunity to go into some operational planning. What are the things that I need to coach up, that I need to teach my team so that when we do hit game one, we're prepared?
Yeah.
And then there's the week-to-week stuff.
Yeah, or the things that you need to do with your coaches to get them
right.
ready to execute the season, right?
There's a lot. Dude, I'll have to show you sometime. I've got pages. I've got an Excel document that is just running columns of, I just laid them on coaching points. And it's everything from how to do warm-ups correctly, how to teach the kids, and this is teaching coaches. This is how to teach the kids how to do the stretches correctly. So they're not just out there wasting time.
Right.
And I mean, kids are made of rubber, so at some point it doesn't matter. But anyways, and then, the game day, that's your tactical execution.
Yeah.
Those are your tactical plans. This is my game plan. And I usually wouldn't even solidify my tactical game plans until morning of. I would always give myself Friday nights to think about it one last time, wake up Saturday morning and then write it down on a piece of paper. This is my tactical game plan. This is how we're going to attack this team. And you got to go into contingency planning. If I've got a heavy run attack and they come in and stack the box with 8 people and bring a safety down, well, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to spread them out.
Yeah.
And I'd have all these these what ifs in my mind. If they come out in a 3-4 cover 2, well, now I've got an opportunity to run some RPO or something like that. If they come in a 5-3 cover 0, well, I'm probably in a passing offense at this point, and so I can kind of break those things down and know where if I see this in the game, I know exactly how I'm going to react, and I don't have to think about it on the fly.
That's right.
This goes into film study and preparation, and so we'll get into more of that when we go into kind of the planning, big picture planning type stuff.
Yeah, it sounds good, man.
Yeah. Dude, going for an hour, man.
Yeah.
Goals. Did we hit everything
else?
on goals?
I think so. I think that's a pretty good deep dive into it, just from both how to do it and then some of the mental aspects around it. So,
well, I would encourage people to practice setting goals, because and here's something that I meant to say a long time ago and I forgot it, but winning is a process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to get to that ultimate, like that disciplined piece of it, to where you can just start clicking things off, right? I want you to start getting some small victories.
Yeah.
Win something small. So maybe your first goal isn't save $1 million. Maybe your first goal is save $100.
Yeah.
And see that and let that sink in a little bit and recognize that feeling that you get when you accomplished something and hey man, I said I was going to do it and I actually did it.
Yeah. Well, that's why chunking it is so important too, because again, like I said, self-discipline isn't a inherent trait to people. Right? It's a skill, and it's a skill that you can build, and you build it by disciplining yourself in those smaller tasks,
small victories,
and getting those small victories. And then, you get a small victory and you're like, hey, I can do this. And then that goal or that idea gets a little bit bigger. And then you move to the next one. You're like, oh dude, I did that too. Right. And then it just grows and grows from there. And what helps in that is that then in that process down the road, when you do face adversity, you can go, that's okay. I got this. I'll make a pivot. I'll make an adjustment. We'll still get there. It's okay. Right?
Well, you hit the nail on the head, man. You get these small victories and you're like, whoa, that feels good.
Yeah.
I can do this, right? Well, that's called confidence.
Yeah. And then you get self-confidence.
You just build self-confidence.
That's right.
And self-confidence will give you the momentum that you need.
It'll maintain your motivation.
And you'll go like, well, if I can save $100, what if I could save $200?
Yeah.
What if I could save $200? And now I've got $300, and you start to pile up these small victories, and now you're just getting more and more confident, and you like that feeling, and that's called momentum. And momentum is what makes you want to win more and win harder.
Yeah, and this is a process too. So if you've never done this before, this is something that you just have to do over time, and continue to do. And it's a process, right? You'll figure it out. You'll figure out the nitty gritty of it and how to operate in it the best for you. But you'll never get there if you don't start, right? So start, pick a goal, go after it, make adjustments, take the lessons learned, and then pick the next goal, and just keep. And as you go through these iterative processes, you're going to get better and better at it.
Could be something simple like I'm going to read 2 books this month.
Yeah,
something simple. You go out and see if you can read 2 books this month. It's really not that hard. But at the end of the month, you go, hey, man, I read 3 books.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you know what? Next month, I'm going to set 4. I'm going to say 4. And I'm going to keep pushing out this goal just a little bit and keep challenging myself some. That broadens my aperture. That builds my self-confidence. And maybe you hit a wall and, get to, well, my goal is to read 12 books this month. Well, okay.
Yeah, it might be a little unrealistic.
If you get to 10, dude, you read 10 books. That's awesome. You also failed your goal. So let's go back and maybe let's rewind that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dude, that was good.
Yeah. Anything else, man?
Well, shit, I feel like we could go for another hour, but
sure.
Let's, when we get to the planning process, we'll have to revisit some of this.
Sure.
And just kind of wave tops it real quick and then get down into the nitty gritty of the planning stuff.
Sounds good.
All right, man. What else you got?
Be the change.
Be the one.
Hey guys, one of the consistent topics we discuss on the Be One Change One podcast is the importance of resiliency, seizing opportunities, and choosing courage over comfort to achieve what is important to you. So if you're an outdoorsman, we would encourage you to explore Sick Bear Outdoors.
That's right. Sick Bear believes in using the symbol of resilience to empower your outdoor adventures and to experience the wildness of life's trails. Sick Bear adopts the bear's approach by fearlessly embracing nature, standing your ground, and courageously facing challenges. Get out of your comfort zone at sickbear.com. That's SICBEAR.com. Visit sickbear.com for all of your individual and family hunting, fishing, or outdoor adventure needs. Thanks for flying with the Be One Change One podcast. If you got something out of this show, then be the one and share it in your circles of influence.
You can be our wingman through our website at www.be1change1.com. That's be and the number 1, change and the number 1.com.
We invite you to be the one and join our fighter squadron on social media at Be1Change1 on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can follow us at Paul Roscoe White on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as Roscoe's website, www.paulroscoewhite.com.
You can email us from the website and please leave comments, share, and ask questions, or leave ideas of things you would like to discuss on future podcasts. Most importantly, be the one that helps us win the algorithm by leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening on.
Thanks for joining. Until next time, be the one.